The two officers dragged the woman to the riverbank, prepared to take her home. The woman's cries for help attracted an old man passing by, who secretly observed from behind a tree. Just as they were about to shoot, the old man threw a stone into the nearby woods, spooking the officers into checking the noise, when suddenly the old man appeared from behind. He threatened them to drop their guns, and then kneel with their hands on their heads. Given the old man had a gun, they had no choice but to comply. The old man revealed he had been in the force for 35 years, advising them against foolish actions. The female officer claimed the woman was the criminal, and had attacked her. But the old man could tell the situation was not so simple. He decided to take them to the police station. Hearing this, Tommy instantly panicked. Their actions could not be exposed. So, he told the female officer, if he stood up and the old man didn't act, to pick up the gun. He was convinced, if the old man was truly a cop, he would not harm another officer. He slowly stood up, and as expected, the old man, sensing trouble, urged the woman to run. The female officer immediately grabbed a gun and fired at them, failing to hit due to poor aim, allowing their escape. With no other choice, they had to first eliminate any traces of the scene, then consult their superiors. The frightened woman frantically ran through the woods, ignoring the old man's calls and not daring to stop, eventually hiding in an abandoned house, hoping to find something to cut open her bindings. She wedged a machete in the sink, about to saw through her bindings, accidentally knocking over a metal barrel. The noise alerted the searching officers. Tommy instructed the female officer to check it out, while he went after the old man. Inside, the woman finally freed herself, but it was too late to flee. So, she found a dagger in a toolbox, hid it in her waistband, and pretended to be still bound at the door when the female officer arrived, striking back decisively when she approached, then quickly running away. The female officer was wounded. She hurriedly called Tommy for backup. Meanwhile, the fleeing woman made it to the riverside, thinking she had escaped pursuit and ready to rest. A pair of hands suddenly covered her mouth from behind. It was the old man who had saved her before. He assured he would not hurt her, and asked her to share her basic information for him to help better. To show his sincerity, the old man introduced himself first. He used to be a cop. His wife passed away from sickness 3 weeks ago, leading him to resign and come here. Man said her name was Jane, a photojournalist on a trek in memory of her father, accidentally witnessing and photographing the female officer's wrongdoing. The old man said to truly take down these villains, they needed evidence. So, he asked Jane to retrieve the camera from the woods, while he went to get his phone, planning to regroup here later, after splitting up to execute their plans. Meanwhile, learning of Tommy's and his partner's failure, Chief Hank drove to the scene. After a brief look at the female officer's injuries, he pulled Tommy aside, emphasizing the urgency of capturing the escapees. Noting the female officer would only slow them down now, Tommy was hesitant to act against his partner, but Hank reminded him of the upcoming promotion. The position would be his if he succeeded. With the election approaching, they couldn't afford any mistakes. Under the allure of power, Tommy finally conceded, slowly approaching the wounded female officer. The injured female officer lay on the ground, but her partner unfastened the tourniquet from her leg. The female officer tried to resist, but was already too weak to struggle. She desperately begged Tommy to spare her, but Tommy had already made a power deal with the chief. He held down the female officer's hands tightly, promising to take good care of her son. Soon, the female officer stopped struggling. Then Hank instructed Tommy to stay and clean up the scene, while he went to search for the two escapees. He followed their trail and quickly found the old man's cabin, approaching carefully with his gun drawn. Meanwhile, the old man was nervously packing up inside, while Hank cautiously approached with his gun outside. As Hank entered and carefully searched, the old man took the chance to escape through the back door. On the other side, as Tommy was preparing to dispose of the female officer's body, suddenly, Jane ran past him. Tommy immediately dropped the body and chased her, finally tackling her on a muddy hillside. Jane kicked Tommy away, intending to retaliate with the toy gun given by the old man, but found it was out of bullets. So, she ran down the hill, picking up a tool from the female officer's body to fight back. However, under Tommy's overpowering strength, the tool was quickly snatched away. In a critical moment, Jane smartly pulled out the toy gun from Tommy's waist, managing to fend him off, then painfully removed the dagger to bandage her wound with her outer clothing. Though Hank found the cabin empty, he made a significant discovery from a photo on the wall. The blonde girl in the photo was his dispatcher, Mary. He immediately called Mary, and after questioning, learned she was the old man's niece. Using this as leverage, he obtained the old man's phone number, finding a new way to manipulate him. Excitedly, Hank tried to call Tommy, but received no answer. By the time he returned, Tommy had already been rendered motionless. Enraged, Hank called his subordinates to take control of Mary. Then he straightly called the old man, indicating his intent, and stating that to save his niece, he must hand over Jane in exchange. To stabilize Hank's mood, the old man agreed initially. However, Jane overheard everything as she arrived to meet up, and without waiting for an explanation, she ran away, like a startled rabbit. Trusting no one, she rushed into a house, hiding with the girl in the loft, and wedged a chair against the door handle. But the pursuing old man didn't break in. Instead, he sat at the door, patiently explaining his plan to Jane. Since Hank had never seen or heard Jane before, he planned for another girl to call Hank, stabilizing him and ensuring his niece's temporary safety. Meanwhile, Jane would use the opportunity to send the evidence to the FBI. It was their only chance, and under the circumstances, Jane agreed. Following their plan, they called Hank, but cunning Hank demanded the girl keep counting uninterruptedly until he arrived. Hours later, Hank arrived with the hostage Mary at the agreed spot. Raising his phone to inspect the upstairs, found it empty. At that moment, Jane appeared with a gun from behind a door. A smug Hank ordered his subordinate to send the hostage to meet God, but was rebutted by the old man's voice. As it turned out, Hank's subordinates outside were already under the old man's control, and by then, the FBI had surrounded the building downstairs. Because while Hank was fetching the hostage, Jane had already sent the evidence to the FBI using a computer. An enraged Hank engaged in a struggle with Jane, but the one emerging was an injured Hank. Finally, justice was served. Jane then continued on her new journey.